Maryam Moshiri from the UK. Welcome to Global Arena.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, briefly, let's start by getting to know a little bit about you. What do we have to know about Maryam Moshiri?
Well, I am a chief presenter at BBC World News. I've worked there at BBC for 17 years now, and before that I was a radio reporter reporting at Independent Radio News for 2 years in London, doing business reporting. So I started my career pretty much as a business reporter. In those days, I think life was a lot easier for young journalists. There was a lot more opportunity, there are more jobs going, and at the time that I finished my postgraduate diploma after my degree, my sister, who was also a journalist, was working at Independent Radio News, and she basically helped open the door for me, got me my first job. And I worked there for 2 years reporting for the National Radio Network, and then I began doing a little bit of television here and there. And when the opportunity arose to apply for a presenting job at the BBC, I applied straight away. I didn't get the job, but I was offered some work at the BBC presenting. And so I started doing the odd presenting shift here and there. And eventually, after a while, I was offered a staff job. So I began by presenting business news from the London Stock Exchange for BBC World News Today, which is a morning programme presented in those days by Sally Bundock. And I would do a little insert from the London Stock Exchange into that programme. Eventually, as my career progressed, I was promoted to presenting the programme. And I did business presenting on the BBC News Channel and BBC World for many, many years, during which time I also had 3 children, which was quite difficult, quite a lot to handle. Then about a year ago, I was promoted to chief presenter on BBC World News, which is, I have to be honest, Umar, it's my dream job. It's the best job that I could even think of doing. When I was a young girl doing my postgraduate diploma at the London College of Communications, we did a tour of the BBC World Newsroom, and I remember thinking, I really want to work here, and I want to be a presenter. I always wanted to be a news presenter, a news journalist, ever since I can remember. I've always wanted to do that. So working at BBC World News as a chief presenter is a dream job for me. Absolutely, it's what I've always wanted to do.
What's the secret behind this? It kind of like strikes me whenever I hear people saying that my ultimate passion, my ultimate ambition is to work for the BBC World Service. A lot of people have this kind of vision here, and surprisingly, it seems like it's the same thing with you.
I know, I was very lucky. I was very lucky. I think, you know what, Umar, it's a mixture very much of being able to do the job. So I suppose it's talent. But, a lot of people have talent. You have talent. A lot of people have talent. The second thing is being at the right place at the right time. And the third thing is also just pure luck. You have to be lucky. The opportunity is there when you are available, and you see it and you go for it. There are so many talented people around the world. It's a very, very competitive business, being in TV news journalism, especially, I'm sure, in America and indeed in the UK. And I'm sure also in Nigeria, it's very competitive. Everybody wants to do the job. It's an amazing job. It opens up a lot of opportunities for you. And I think, the secret for me, at least, was a mixture of, first of all, being able to do the job. I did training at the London College of Communications for a year. I worked for free at various radio stations when I was a student. I really tried hard to get as much experience as I possibly could. Secondly, it's being at the right place at the right time, often having connections as well. Remember, my first job I got because of my sister. If it hadn't have been for her, I probably wouldn't have really known how to get into that particular news corporation, IRN, and that led me to do some presenting as well. And she opened the door for the presenting on TV as well, because she was presenting on TV too, and she helped me get some presenting work at the beginning. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is just pure luck. At the time that I was trying to get into the BBC, they were looking for new faces. They were looking for new presenters. They auditioned people. I didn't audition for the BBC. Now it's very difficult to get that opportunity to get on air at BBC News. There are many different ways to do it, but it's not quite as easy as it used to be in the old days. So I think it's a mixture of all of those things. I've always wanted to be a presenter, not just a presenter, but a TV journalist, a broadcast journalist. Ever since I was a young child, my grandparents and my parents would watch news all day. So I come from school, we'd watch the 6 o'clock news. That was a family event. The 9 o'clock news, big family event. 10 o'clock news. I'd watch all the news. On a Sunday afternoon, I'd watch Zainab Badawi presenting Channel 4 News. We were all very news-oriented. So for me, it's that innate desire to know what's happening in the world and to tell people a story.
What a surprise. You used to watch Zainab Badawi, one of the greatest people I've grown up to admire.
And then when I worked with her at BBC News, I met her, I said to her, I used to watch you every Sunday doing Channel 4 News. My granddad was in love with her.
Oh my God, that's very good.
My granddad was in love with you. He was an 80-year-old man in the 1990s. Yes. God bless him. And he was a big fan of hers. And, now I think if he were alive today, I would say to him, Granddad, look, I've sat next to Zainab Badawi and I've presented with her. He'd be so proud.
Oh my God. What did she say? I know she had to laugh and find it.
Yeah, she did laugh. Funny. She's a very classy woman.
Yes, of course. That's very good. How has it been for you working for the BBC World Service, the great people that you've met and the working environment there and other stuff like that? How has it been for you? Fun?
So what I love about the working environment, what I love about it, Umar, is it's a big mix of people. The BBC World Service Television Department, we have a mix of people from all over the world who are working there, who bring their own experiences and their own world viewpoint to the job. I mean, it's an absolute honor to work with some of the people that I work with there. And also just working on all the stories we work on every day, at the moment, the American elections, the COVID-19 pandemic. These stories that we've been working on over the past year, telling the story to people, making sure that people get the facts and get the truth. It's just an absolute honor, and it's so important as well for not only for the people who watch, but also globally. I think, having a press that is free and that you can trust and that you can put your faith in is also really important. So, on a personal level, working in the newsroom, as I said, I've met a lot of really interesting people. And the wonderful thing about being in a newsroom is you can go into a newsroom and you're all like-minded people. So you'll all want to talk about what's happening in the news. You'll have your opinions. It can be lively debate, but it's never boring working in a newsroom environment because everyone is interested in the same thing and everyone has the same goal as well.
All right, that's very good. This has brought us to the issue of credibility, because you've just spoken about how hard you try, how tirelessly you're working to make sure that the facts are being disseminated to the public. How credible is the BBC World Service? I believe you're going to say, yes, it's purely credible. You're going to say it's impartial. You're going to say it's free. All those beautiful adjectives, I believe you're going to use them. Just like your North America editor, this guy, John Sopel, when he was interviewing Donald Trump, and he said, "Where are you from?" He said, "From the BBC." Donald Trump was saying that amazing. And what struck me at that time was that John Sopel said BBC, impartial, free and fair. How free, fair and credible is the BBC World Service?
Yes, I think that, on a global stage, I don't have the exact figure at the tip of my fingers, but I know that we are the most, if not one of the most trusted news sources in the world. And the BBC has worked really hard to gain that reputation, and it's not been easy. It's in the UK particularly, given the polarization politically, it's a very difficult job for the BBC, not because we're not impartial, but because of the people view us in a different way. So let's say, if we have a guest on one subject saying something and a guest saying something else, you'll always have people who disagree with one guest and agree with another guest. The key thing here is to try, in the right circumstances, to provide both points of view, to tell people, look, you know, these are the facts, this is what's happening, and you know, you can make up your own mind. So ultimately, I think BBC has spent many decades trying its best to underline that fact and to also work really hard to maintain its reputation. I think in an era of fake news, in an era of social media, where you can just say anything and it can be picked up on Twitter or on Facebook or on any other social media, and you know, it can snowball and untruths become truths. It's very important to have that anchor that I believe the BBC provides globally. And you know, I work in the newsroom, Umar, every day, and I can tell you that we as journalists really struggle every day to try and make things fair and to make things right. And we get a lot of criticism, you know. We get, in the UK politically, we get the left telling us that we're too right-wing, the right-wing telling us we're too left-wing. And I believe that if you have both those sides complaining about you, you're doing something right.
Briefly, before I ask you about the issue of objectivity, like, what's the difference between left-wing and right-wing? Because somebody asked me earlier on in the morning that some people are accusing BBC of being left-wing. And some of our listeners may need to know the difference between left-wing and right-wing.
It's just politically. I mean, on the political spectrum, you have, you know, people on the left, people on the right. So I'm talking about, for example, people who support the Labour Party, who are conceived as more left-wing, and those who support the Conservative Party in the UK, who are conceived as more right-wing. Those who voted, for example, in the referendum as well, we have the people who voted for Brexit, against Brexit, again, polarised situation in the UK, and both sides criticising the BBC for, you know, being too pro-Europe, too anti-Europe. That's what I mean by objectivity and the difficulty that we have, and the two different sides criticising us.
Yes, the BBC World Service is said to be purely funded by the public. And it's like, I got a question about this one. Whosoever refuses to pay the, what do you call it, like a levy?
License fee.
License fee. Whosoever refuses to pay is penalized, is being punished. I don't know whether that is true. How true is this information?
Yes, no, it's absolutely true. So not for the BBC World Service. BBC World Television is a commercial enterprise. So that's not paid by the license fee. But in the UK, the BBC UK arm is paid for through a license fee, which is, yes, if you don't pay it, it's legally enforceable. You can be fined for not paying it. And the reason for that is that because the BBC needs to maintain its funding through that method. And that's one of the reasons why it is obligatory to pay the license fee if you watch television using a TV, if you watch live television.
What if you don't watch?
If you don't watch any television, you don't pay the license fee.
Okay. Okay. Felix Nongo is one of our contributors and followers. Says, since the BBC is being funded by the general public, does it have any effects on your programs? I mean, like the public having influence on you guys and on your reportings and your programs?
Well, like it affects us in one way. Because we are a public service broadcaster, it means that we have to maintain editorial standards, and we have to abide by certain editorial guidelines which impact the way that we work, which ensure that we are unbiased and impartial, and that we serve all the people. So, for example, in the BBC, we'll have so many different television channels, BBC One, BBC Two, BBC Four. We then have CBeebies, CBBC, the children's television channels. We have Radio 4, for those people who want to listen to talking radio. We have Radio 5 Live, which is a sport radio station. Radio 1 that caters for 16 to 24-year-olds. Radio 2 that caters for slightly older audience. We have to make sure that we provide content, television and radio and online, for everybody. So we can't just produce stuff that will be enjoyed and watched by younger generation. We have to make sure we provide something that is going to be enjoyed by everyone. So that's what we have to do. That's our obligation. And that's one of the reasons why we get the license fee money, is because we can guarantee that we can do that.
And what sort of reactions are you getting from like the public? Like, are they satisfied with you 100% with your reporting?
Well, I don't know. I hope so. I hope so. I don't think anyone is satisfied 100% with anything. I think the BBC has come under a lot of pressure recently, especially because of Brexit and the way that that was borne out through the media. It's just been a difficult time for the BBC. But I think that now more than ever, a broadcast corporation like the BBC is really necessary. It's needed not only for the UK but also globally. Umar.
Okay, that's really great. Talking about Brexit, how hard has it been for you people to talk about, to strike a balance between pro-Brexit and anti-Brexit?
It's been difficult, but I think the BBC have done as good a job as they could, striking that balance between pro-Brexit and anti-Brexit. Ultimately, we needed to try to be as impartial as possible, and I think we did a really good job doing that.
Okay, that's really great. Let's now talk about, Alhassan Bala is sending a question. I'm going to read the question of Alhassan Bala later. The question of Alhassan Bala says, what do you say to the upcoming broadcasters who are aspiring to be journalists? What sort of advice?
Well, I mean, it's really difficult to give you advice because it's such a different landscape now than it was when I first started. But I think the most important advice I can give is that if you want to be a journalist, then don't give up. Keep pushing to do what you want to do. In particular, I think it would really help people, especially younger people, to get as much experience as possible. So maybe offering to go into a newsroom and help out, a local newspaper or a local radio station, to maybe, go out and find stories, think about stories to tell, write those stories, send them to, online outlets or local newspapers. I think, starting local is a good way. Getting as much experience as possible is also a really good way. I don't know how things work in Nigeria, but in the UK, it's difficult, because if you're going to go and get that experience, you have to invariably do work for free. And unless you have some sort of financial backing, it's tough to do that. So I think that, do your best if you can to get that work experience, and also, work really hard on getting connections as well, making sure you know the right people to talk to within different local radio stations or local newspapers, and, keep going, keep trying, keep pushing.
Okay, that's very good. I'm going to ask you about the condition of, the nature of work for the BBC. How hard is it or easy? Because I think that you guys sometimes have to go and spend a lot of hours. Sometimes you have to spend the whole night there doing one program or the other, or preparing for one program or the other. How tough is it?
Well, it depends on who you are. And what hours you do. Ultimately, 10 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning in London is, the middle of the day somewhere else in the world. So you have to always be ready for breaking news and for breaking news happening anywhere in the world. But in terms of, how tough it is, I think that it's a job like many others. I'm a presenter, so I come into work in the morning or in the afternoon to start my shift. On an ordinary day before COVID, I'd have a makeup person do my makeup and do my hair. I get dressed, I go and talk to the editor and the producers about the program. And ultimately, the big responsibility for any program lies with the editor and the producers. They have a lot of the work to do because they need to find the guests, to make sure that they write the scripts, that they research the stories. I can input as much as I can, but ultimately the really hard work is done by other people.
So your job is only to read the news, to present the program?
No, not necessarily. I've got to also research the guests that I've been given. So I need to, if, for example, they tell me we've got Umar coming on to the program to talk about something, I'll have to make sure I research and read about you, and also make sure that, all the scripts that are written properly. I'll check them, I'll read them through beforehand. I'll also need to be ready if any breaking news happens. I need to be there. If, let's say, there's a shooting in Paris or in France or something happens, I need to be knowledgeable and know what to say and be able to, react quickly. That's part of the skill of being a presenter. But the actual day-to-day work on the programs, yes, I mean, that's done mainly by producers and editors. They're the ones who should be, should be lauded, because they're the ones who do most of the work.
Yeah, as I told you, I teach in an English teaching center here in Kano State, Nigeria, and one of the subjects that I teach is public speaking. And we find it difficult to deal with a lot of students. They have the language to speak, either English or Hausa, especially in English, but they don't have the confidence to express their ideas very well. Does it take a great deal of confidence for someone to appear or on a TV channel like the BBC World Service and present news and present interviews?
I don't know. I think it probably does take a lot of confidence. I think you do need to be a certain kind of person to want to do that every day. I know that when I was very young, I loved public speaking. At my school, I did public speaking. I joined the debating society at school. I was also part of the Model United Nations in London, which I did as well, which I really enjoyed. I think, and when I was very, very young, I really enjoyed doing my own shows as well. Me and my sister used to stand up in front of guests at my parents' house. And I did love the sound of my own voice, and I still do. I think you have to have a little bit of that natural, what's the word for it? You love being a bit more extrovert, a bit more on show. I think you need to have that confidence. And I'm not sure whether some people are born with that confidence or some people attain that confidence. But I think that even if you're not born with it, you can work on it, And I think that the school you go to is important, because there are some schools where they really encourage a huge amount of public speaking and, debating. And that, I think, is really important, especially for younger generation as well, if they're coming up and trying to gain that confidence. But, I've never really had a problem with being on TV. I love it. I do get nervous, though, Umar, sometimes. Yeah. And I get nervous if I'm doing something new, like a new situation I've never done before. Let's say I'm interviewing someone really important, or I'm sent somewhere and I'm standing outside and I've got to do this live and I've got no script and I'm standing there and I'm about to do a live, and, everyone's relying on me to tell the story. And I might get a bit nervous then. So you still get nervous, but I quite enjoy getting nervous, because being nervous is what makes you really feel alive,
Yeah, that's very good. Can you think about the personalities, the important personalities that you have personally so far interviewed, especially on your shows on the BBC World?
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people, Umar. I can't even remember. I mean, it's just so many people. I've really enjoyed doing business presenting, because for many years I, presented business programs in the UK, interviewed a lot of the top CEOs globally. So I've interviewed a lot of people. It's been a long career. I mean, I've interviewed the likes of, Lord Brown of BP, Richard Branson. I interviewed the boss of Netflix. I interviewed the guy who made Toy Story. I interviewed more recently Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister, and I talked to him about the rollout of the vaccinations for COVID-19. And it was really interesting to talk to him, because, he at the moment is trying to really push for fair rollout of vaccinations. So the vaccinations being rolled out not only for developed nations, but also developing nations across the world, who he argued are at the back of the queue for vaccination. So, I interview a whole lot of interesting people, and I absolutely love my job. I can interview a protester outside, Parliament, and I can interview an MP, or I can interview a business leader, or, it's just so varied. And I think that's one of the things that I love about my job, that no 2 days are ever the same. No 2 interviews, no 2 days are ever the same. So, today, for example, I interviewed a sociology expert about the kinds of groups and people who were behind the invasion of the Capitol building on Wednesday. Yes, and we talked through the psychology of those people, and she explained to me the different kind of disparate groups that came together because of social media and online cohesion. So, you learn a lot interviewing people. And that's part of the beauty of doing the job that I do, is that every day I'm learning something new and I'm interviewing somebody different. And in learning something new, I'm also, giving back to the audience as well, because they're learning it with me.
All right, so you're also a teacher, I guess.
I don't know about that, but yeah.
Okay, let's now talk about journalism in the era of COVID-19, and specifically you at the BBC World working during in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, Umar, I've not stopped working for a single day since the COVID pandemic. And as you know, in the UK, journalists are considered key workers. We're considered essential workers. So we're allowed to go into work. And because I'm broadcast critical, which means that I have to be in the building, I've had to go into the building even during the height of the pandemic. And even today, 1 in 30 Londoners have COVID. It's spreading like wildfire. The Mayor of London has declared a state of emergency in the city, and I'm still having to go to work and to do my job. So, part of that, obviously, you feel a little bit of anxiety about having to do that when you see a lot of your friends or people in other lines of work who are able to work from home and don't have to leave their house. So I worry about that. But I think that my job is so important, especially in terms of being a public service and getting that information out there to people, that I work through that, The things that have changed at BBC, well, we have a lot fewer people in the building. The new broadcasting house, which is where I work, is, I think it's not even a quarter full to capacity. So the BBC have tried really hard to reduce the number of people who are coming into the building. Some of the work that we do with BBC News Channel, which is the BBC's UK news channel, we have joined those channels together for some of our output, which means obviously that there are fewer people needed in the building. Our branded programs, like, for example, Live with Lucy or Impact, we don't have those branded programs anymore. We still produce news in that time, but they're not branded. And the reason why they're not branded at the moment is just because of COVID-19. Again, we have fewer people in the office, and we're trying really to create a safe environment for people who work at the BBC. And now in the last day or two, we've been told, Umar, that we are going to be all getting COVID-19 tests once or twice a week. I think they're starting it in a couple of weeks. And we're also going to be given these buzzers, which you put around your neck, which will buzz every time you go within 2 meters of somebody. So I think the BBC has done an absolutely incredible job in keeping us safe during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also in trying really to change the way that we work so that we are, in the face of a very, very rampant pandemic and virus, we are trying to keep as safe as we possibly can, but at the same time providing the quality service that people expect from BBC News.
Alhassan also has asked me to put this question to you. What sort of advice would you have to young journalists, not young journalists, practicing journalists here on how to take precautionary measures against this COVID-19 pandemic? Especially I would say that if you can do your interviews on Zoom or on Skype, we are not allowing any guests to come into the building, even if they live 5 minutes away. We are trying really hard to reduce the number of people coming into the building. I would also say that if you are interviewing somebody for a broadcast interview or anything like that, you should do it outside. You should not do an interview inside. You should try really hard, if you are going to interview somebody, to stand as far away from them as possible. These are basic things. Wear a mask. I mean, I don't know how common wearing a mask is in Nigeria, but at the moment, there's a real push in this country to get people to wear masks all the time. Now, of course, there will be some elements of society who will rebel against that and won't wear masks. But I think that if you are going to be doing your job as a journalist, you should be wearing a mask on the job. At the BBC now, we have to wear a mask inside the building unless we're sat at our desks. Yes, I can see that. There was a time when I saw your friend, your colleague, Aaron Hazelhards, presenting from the basement of his house. What is his kitchen or basement or something
Yeah,
like that?
he
It was
presents
like
from
fun.
there. Yes, I mean, Aaron's show used to be presented from Television Centre, from New Broadcasting House.
Mm.
And again, because the BBC want to reduce the number of people in the building, they made the decision to first of all, to stop his show, Talking Business, temporarily, but to also enable Aaron to present from home. So he had a camera kit and lighting and everything set up in his kitchen. And so he can now broadcast to his fans across the world and in Nigeria.
I hope you'll be able to appear on global arena just like you are, so that we can talk to him about his experience. He's really one of the nicest BBC journalists I've ever watched.
I'll ask him for you.
Thank you so much indeed. Well, let's now talk about the BBC World Service versus the African continent. And what do you make of the stories coming from Africa, personally?
The stories, African stories, I think that Africa is a very rich continent. I mean, it's got so much to offer in terms of stories. I think that the BBC does a great job of telling those stories, especially in terms of our Africa Focus program. I think that the correspondents that we have, Focus on Africa, yes, the correspondents we have are some of the best correspondents in the world that we have in Africa. I think that, however, I do think that for main BBC World News, I think that at the moment, obviously with COVID and with US politics, the focus is very much elsewhere. But I think in the future, we will be focusing more and more on the African continent and indeed all the stories that we see from there, because I think it is a very rich opportunity for us to tell the story of so many different countries and so many different viewpoints as well.
How do you react to those people accusing you of focusing on only doom and gloom of the African continent, only the negativities, the negative aspect of Africa, war, famine, diseases, and other things like that? You cannot see, as those accusers are saying, one single report coming from international media like the BBC that takes a look at one sort of developing thing or something that has to do with development and advancement. How do you react?
I think that the problem is with these stories is that sometimes the issue, and especially with any country we deal with, even with, if we deal with a country like, for example, Iran, which is a country that I was born in, I think if we're doing a story on Iran, we're not going to it's difficult to sell a story that doesn't have an impact in that way. So if there is an awful story like a famine or a horrible story like an earthquake or some natural disaster or some political disaster, those are the stories that make the news. They're the ones that hold the interest globally of the global viewers, and so those are the ones that we are automatically quite attracted to. But I think you're right, it's really important that we also tell the positive stories about Africa. I know that our Africa Business Report team have been really working hard on finding really positive stories, business stories on Africa about up-and-coming Africans, young Africans, business people, and also huge African economies, like, for example, Nigerian economy, and what they have to offer to the global stage.
So focusing on the negative aspect of Africa is a kind of mistake that you want to rectify, you want to...
I don't think it's a mistake. I think that, it's a fair comment that we do a lot of negative stories, but I think the news, more often than not, that interests people is often the news that isn't, always a great news story. Do you see what I mean? It's not always the way that people want to watch the news. If there was a successful story from, let's say the country that I was born in, Iran, it'll be much less interesting for people than a story about an earthquake, because of course people are much more interested in those kind of stories. And also it's important that we get stories about natural disasters and issues out, because then if the story is told globally, then there could be help that arrives to that country or to those people, because their story is being told on a global stage.
Okay. Adam Mustafa Zaharaddin, one of my classmates at university, says, what kind of challenges are facing the BBC. Let me read the questions directly. He wants to know the kind of challenges facing the BBC despite the success, the great deal of success it has so far recorded.
Well, at the moment, the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on advertising revenue for the world television news arm, which is the commercial arm of the BBC, and that has made things very difficult for us. But I think it's the same globally for all news corporations that rely on advertising. In terms of the BBC itself and BBC News, I think that, you know, at the moment, the biggest challenge for us is just in what is an era of fake news and social media. And it's for us to really try hard to keep doing what we're doing, to uphold our, you know, promised editorial values and our impartiality, and to, you know, tell the truth and to inform people globally of what is actually happening. That's the biggest challenge for us, given the number and the amount of fake news stories, pictures and ideas that are being thrown about because of the rise and power of social media. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges for us. That, and also financially, I think, as you know, it's something that's all over the world at the moment. The COVID pandemic really has had an impact on finances as well. So I think those are the two biggest challenges for us as a news corporation.
I hope it hasn't affected your salaries. That's a joke. Let me conclude. Maryam Moshiri, it's really a pleasure having you on Global Arena, and we cannot thank you enough for being on the show.
Umar, it's an absolute honor for me to be asked to appear on Global Arena. I know that you do a lot of great work, and this is a great program. It's really interesting, and you make it very interesting with your really insightful and intelligent you. And any time about the news or come to me about questions. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Hassan. Bye-bye, Hassan. Nice to meet you. Bye-bye. Take care.